sun is up and the weather is fine. Hi, this is Doug for the Full Earth Workshop, and Dragula is not going to wait any longer. Here's episode 6 where we start putting together the body from scratch. Now, as you remember, we rebuilt the chassis once because I really wasn't satisfied with how flexible that it was, so we beefed it up just a little bit, and we're going to replace the suspension. However, this time we're going to do it upside down. You know why? Because we can. It just looks kind of cool that way, and it works a little better with the ride height. So that's our plan, and we're sticking to it. I am really satisfied with the positioning of the wheelie bar. As you see, when we put the guide flag into place, it is very easy to turn back and forth, yet it is just shy of the front suspension member. One thing I have noticed is the rear slicks could be a little bit taller, and we'll see when we start putting the chassis, which is actually a miniature coffin, when we put that onto the body, we're going to find out if the ride height looks correct. Now we're going to do a template from cardboard. As you see, I just used the little sketches to come up with my initial measurement. We're going to have to make sure that a few places on this chassis have some areas that can be passed through. First of all, on the back, we're making sure that there's room for the axle to pass through. Also, the pivot for the wheelie bar is a little bit wider. We'll have to make a little exception for that, which we'll probably cover up later on. Here you can see we're also extending the front part of the coffin section. A little bit later I'm going to decide to cut that off because if you're looking at the one-to-one vehicle, you'll actually see that it's inset. So bear with me for a few minutes until we do that. We're using about 2mm styrene here in case you're making a little list of things that you need to order for yours. I usually find that when I make the first part of 2, I normally use the first part as the template for the second just because it's easier to cut right along the side. If I'm cutting out something that has an interior radius, I try to use a drill to make that radius because it just works a lot better than doing it by hand. And then I cut the straights from that. And you'll see as I clip it out, I've got a good head start on that nice profile, which is an access for the axle. If we're talking about fun factor, I would say we're right up there with starting to create the whole body. I love doing the chassis. There's a lot of planning in that stage, but here you're kind of making the whole thing come to fruition as you're starting to figure, wow, how am I going to sand this radius into the corner? You got to think about those thicknesses, and you've also got to make sure that your ride height is correct. You will notice that after doing a 2D sketch, you can be tricked by a few things when you're looking at things orthographically. So as you start to build, you realize, ooh, this part may be a little bit too tall. We're going to try to make this taper in a little bit more than I thought. This is still a learning process as you go through. That is one of the things that is so fun, though, because you're really learning and exploring as you go around this whole thing. Well, this thing's looking, well, a little boxy. Well, maybe that's because it's based on a box. Normally when I'm building a body, I'm thinking about, okay, we put this curve in here and a little bit of taper here. Not true with Dragula. Dragula is a box with a tiny little box up front and a canopy. I know I create bodies sometimes in SolidWorks where you can do a lot more surfacing. This ain't that. Now, to make sure that this body clears the pivot points for the wheelie bar, we have to make these little notches in the side. Or for our Spanish-speaking friends, they are buenos notches. With the side panels in place, it seems like it's a little bit wide, but then as I check with the canopy section against what we see in the photographs, it actually looks about right. We've talked about this miter box before, and it's of course very good for cutting, but it also, since it's a great 90 degree, we can use that for the corners to make sure that they're perfectly square. You may notice here and there that I'm taking a few little parts off and putting a few little parts on, and that's just because I'm having to allow for some clearances, and I'm going to replace with more refined parts a little bit later on. I'm finding that just brushing in this Tamiya cement, all this really is just a melting agent for the styrene plastic. I think when I finally go to maybe putting some of the final parts on, I'll actually revert to using some cyanoacrylate because it tends to work a lot faster, and I think the bond is just as good or better than using the styrene cement. Some of the work that I'm doing here violates my standards of cleanliness. Your hands start to get a little dirty and the styrene starts to show a little bit of darkness. Don't worry about it. We're going to go back and we're going to sand, so it's going to look a lot better once we finally get the main structure. And then we'll start working on rounding the corners, and I'll show you how we're planning on doing that. And I will also work on a crown section, a nice arc for the top cover section of the coffin. We're going to have to make several accesses in the coffin lid. One is for the engine to pop through, and another is a section to hold the canopy. Now you'll see this reinforcement right behind the motor. I'm going to see if that can possibly be used to hold the instrument panel in the front. I'm not sure those clearances are going to work out. We're going to have to try to figure out some way to make it look as if it has an interior, even if there's not really enough room for an interior. This structural member is also to hold that engine as it pops through the cover, and then the awesomeness will begin to rise from Grandpa Munsters' cellar. Hey, we are burning moonlight here. If you haven't subscribed yet, come on, man, get with the program. We'd love to have you here. We'll catch you next week, episode 7 on the Full Earth Workshop.